Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the mel0n Review. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of XRayPad's brand new mouse pads, the Origin Pro Extra Soft Cerberus edition. Funnily enough, one of the first professional mouse pads I actually ever used was a really old Aqua Control Plus that I actually still have to this day and is still held up incredibly well over all these years, and I absolutely love that pad. I just stopped using it as I started to review other pads and just generally grew away from it. And now here we are a couple years later with the Origin Pro, and a lot has changed, but in a very good way because XRayPad has absolutely cooked with the Origin Pro lineup, specifically the Cerberus editions. But before we get into the review, I want to say a big thank you to XRayPad, who was kind enough to send out the Origin Pro Extra Soft Cerberus for review. As always, all reviews here on the channel will be unbiased regardless of a free discount unit or affiliation with a brand. And as always, this review will be fully subtitled and timestamps will be available down in the video description. And if you enjoyed the review and want to see more videos like this, be sure to get subscribed so you don't miss any future reviews. Alright, well, let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to talk about the unboxing experience of the Cerberus, then we'll talk about its in-game performance. Now, I wanted to quickly clarify something. There are actually 4 different versions of the Origin Pro pads. They all have the exact same surface stitching, but there will be a slight variation in the feeling and the performance of each version of the Origin Pro due to the printing, surface treatment, and the bases. Kind of similar to what we saw with the mel0n, where that pad was a clone of the Infinite Speed 2, but was slightly faster from it due to the surface printing. Similar situation here with the Origin Pro pads. Now, the biggest difference between the Origin Pros is that the Cerberus editions use a heat-treated surface, which means that the pads will have a work-in period that balances out the surface's performance in terms of its X and Y axis variance over use, whereas the black and orange editions of the Origin Pro use a standard non-treated surface that does keep a difference between the X and Y axis over use. This means that the Cerberus editions are going to feel more balanced once they're worked in, as opposed to the orange and black versions that are more X-axis optimized. There are also some differences in terms of the speed of the different versions of the Origin Pro. In order from slowest to fastest, we have the Origin Pro Extra Soft Black and Orange, that is the slowest, the Origin Pro Extra Soft Cerberus, which is what I'm covering today, which is the second slowest, the Origin Pro Soft in Black and Orange, which is the faster version, and the Origin Pro Cerberus, which is the fastest of the bunch. The softer bases on the Origin Pro offer a faster experience with less control variability, whereas the extra soft bases are a slower, more controlled experience, but do have a wider range of control variability. Also, a quick side note here, the mid-base version on the Orange and Black version will likely feel more akin to the performance on the Cerberus editions, as the speedier surface is going to balance out that differencing in the X and Y axis. It will still be noticeable on the Black and Orange edition, but not as much as it would be on the extra soft base. Alright, now in terms of the unboxing experience, it's pretty straightforward. The Cerberus is rolled up in a tube-like packaging, very similar to the packaging we saw on the Fnatic Dash 2 and the LGG Neptune. The packaging does share the same artwork as the pad, which is a nice attention to detail. The pad is very easy to remove and put back into the tube packaging. One thing I really love is that the top of the tube is easy to remove and put back on. On the packaging for the Dash 2 and the Neptune, air would commonly get stuck inside the tube and it'd make it really difficult to put the top back on, but that is not an issue here on the Origin Pro Cerberus packaging, which is a great attention to detail from XRayPad and makes it much more functional as a carrying case. Now, initially, I will say there was a slight chemical smell from the pad. I'm not sure whether it was from the base or the heat-treated surface, but nonetheless, the light chemical smell did dissipate very quickly once I took it out of the packaging and only lasted for about a day or so. I also wanted to briefly talk about the look of the pad. I personally love the pad's design and artwork. XRayPad collaborated with an artist named Teru, who did the design for the Cerberus editions, and I absolutely love the way the art looks. It reminds me of a pack of like fade dogs hunting something. The print quality on the pad is also superb on the Cerberus editions, which is great to see. Overall, 10 out of 10 for me in terms of appearance. The only pad design I've liked this much recently was the mel0n, and this one is on par with that. Just a really unique, really high quality art print on the pad. It looks fantastic. Alright, now in terms of in-game performance, overall the Cerberus Extra Soft was an incredibly solid performing pad. The jump from the old Aqua Control Plus I used years ago to this pad is like night and day, and I'm very, very impressed with the overall performance of this pad. The Cerberus edition, once the surface is worked in, of course, feels amazing. Very balanced in terms of its surface stitching, which makes the Cerberus feel more like a hybrid pad with a heavy control pad-esque elements to it, hence the balanced experience that XRayPad is advertising here for the Cerberus. The Cerberus Extra Soft is incredibly well-rounded in terms of its in-game performance. It's exceptional for both tracking-heavy games and static-oriented games. Tracking was buttery smooth with a great balance of control from the surfacing and the extra soft base. Target switching was also super consistent due to the control variability of the pad. Static and flicking was also incredibly consistent, as the pad has a very low amount of initial friction while having a good amount of stopping power from the base. The Cerberus Extra Soft was the pad I used the most when I was grinding out the Soldier 76 Hero Mastery in Overwatch 2, and I was able to reach rank 11 in NA on that pad, so if that gives you any idea of how good the performance here is on the Cerberus, that should tell you all you need to know. But overall, the XRayPad Cerberus edition is just a damn good performing pad. It is a very, very well-rounded, fantastic performing pad. The only issue I have with the pad, so to speak, unique is that once you initially get the Cerberus, due to this heat treated surface, it will not feel consistent for the first little bit until the surface is worked in, and that is something very unique we don't really see on too many mouse pads nowadays. So let's talk about the surfacing and this unique heat treatment next. Now, the interesting thing about this heat treated surface on the Cerberus editions is that the pad surface stitching, according to XRayPad, is supposed to be an A-like surface stitch, but if you look at the surface without the pad being worked in, the surface texture looks more of a linear Y-like surface texturing, similar to the surfacing we found in the Tendo SR. This means that X-axis friction is going to feel the smoothest, while Y-axis friction is going to be rough and significantly more controlled as you're going against that Y-like linear stitching. But unlike the Tendo SR, which maintains the differencing in the X and Y-axis friction over use, the surface of the Cerberus will physically change as you work it in. What happens is that the heat-treated fabric will initially be very stiff to the hand, specifically on the Y-axis, but as the surface is exposed to heat and friction during use, the fabric of the Cerberus's surfacing will get softer. This causes the Y-like linear stitching we initially saw in the Cerberus to widen to more of an A-like surface stitching, in doing so balancing out the differencing in the X and Y axis on the Cerberus. Now, I will say, even once the Cerberus is worked in, it's still not 100% balanced. There is an ever so slight variance to the Y axis, as it will have slightly more friction, but nothing that's going to significantly impact the usage of the pad. It still does feel balanced overall. Now, the Cerberus's work-in period will vary heavily depending on your use case. From my experience using donut skates and a bare arm, I didn't notice any changes to the surfacing until about 2 weeks of using the pad. With larger surface area skates and a heavier grip, this may be faster, but this will vary from use case to use case and amount of usage to amount of usage. I did reach out to XRayPad and ask them what the best way to evenly work in the surface of the Cerberus was, and they told me there isn't really a specific way you need to work in the surfacing of the Cerberus. They just said general use will loosen up the fabric and even out the surfacing over use. The only variable to this, of course, is, as I just mentioned, how long it will take to work in. Depending on your use case and what skates you're using, how much you're using the pad, there will be a little more or a little less time to work the pad in. Again, from my case on light use, it was about 2 weeks, but if you're using the pad significantly more, it'll probably be shorter, within a couple days to a week. As I mentioned earlier, the Origin Black for Origin Pros won't soften over use, as they are a non-heat treated surface, and they will maintain the differencing in the X and Y axis over use, similar to what we saw in the Tendo SR, but with those pads you can always shift the orientation of the pad to better match the X and Y axis resistance to your optimized use case. Now, on both these Cerberus and the Orange Black Origins Pros, another factor that will impact the performance is going to be the softness of the bases, so let's talk about that next. Now, in terms of the softness here, I have the extra soft version, so keep in mind if you get the soft base, your experience with the pad will be slightly different. Now, the Origins Pro Extra Soft is unsurprisingly very soft. It feels very similar to the softness on the Infinity Mice Ruin, where the pad is so soft you can push through the pad with your finger, but here on the Cerberus Extra Soft, you do need slightly more force to push through the pad. Now, this high degree of softness does allow for a wide range of control variability, but like we saw on the Infinity Mice Ruin, the range of control variability is so wide it's very easy to bottom out your mouse on the pad's surface when you press into it to get a little more control. From my experience, the bottoming out issue only really happened with some skate types, which we'll talk about in a moment, but the softness on the Cerberus Extra Soft was very easy to utilize once I got accustomed to it. Again, similar to the Ruin, where you kind of have to get used to how far you can press into the pad without bottoming your mouse out. Similar situation here on the Cerberus, just a little easier to get accustomed to. As I talked about earlier in regards to the in-game performance, the added control from the softness of the pad helps the Cerberus Extra Soft feel incredibly consistent for flicking in static games, while also feeling fantastic for target switching and tracking performance. Overall, a great implementation. It just does require some adjustment to get used to the range of the control variability on the pad. As I mentioned earlier, very similar to how you had to do it on the Ruin. Now, in regards to skate compatibility here on the Cerberus Extra Soft, keep in mind this will also apply to the Origins Pro with the Extra Soft base. Dot skates often bottom out on the Cerberus Extra Soft due to its high degree of softness. Thin PTFE and low surface area stock skates and speed stock skates often do the same thing. The only use case where this doesn't happen with those skates is if you're using a very light grip like a fingertip, but this will vary per use case. But full-size stocks, larger dots, and donut skates all worked perfectly fine here on the Cerberus Extra Soft, regardless of the weight or grip type. I found the XRayPad Jade and Obsidian donuts to be the best here, as they're a little taller than most skates are, so you can use them to take more advantage of the softness and the control variability on the pad while maintaining a fast, speedy experience. Alright, let's talk about build quality and QC. In typical XRayPad fashion, the Cerberus Extra Soft is perfectly manufactured. There is no loose threading or inconsistent areas on the pad surfacing. The pad's base is perfectly implemented. Overall, the pad is perfectly built and QC'd. XRayPad even added an extra layer of rounded stitching onto the top left side of the pad where the edge stitching ends to prevent that from fraying over time, which is a fantastic attention to detail. Overall, the Cerberus Extra Soft is really perfect in terms of build quality, easily top 3 of 2024 in terms of overall quality and build. Now, the surfacing of the Cerberus is largely hydrophobic, as it is on most pads. Adding moisture to the surface of the pad, water will bead on the surface for several seconds, and and then it will slowly drain through the gaps in the surface stitching into the pad. From my testing exposing the Cerberus Extra Soft to way more moisture than it'd ever be normally exposed to, the pad does slow down ever so slightly due to the surface stitching being waterlogged, but this is way more moisture than the pad would ever be exposed to. Humidity doesn't seem to have any effect on the performance of the pad either, which is great to see. Keep in mind, however, this is the Extra Soft Cerberus. The effects of moisture and the effects of humidity may be different on the other versions of the Origins Pro due to the differencing in the surfacing and the base's softness, but from my experience here with the Cerberus Extra Soft, the pad was largely unaffected by water or humidity. Now, in terms of the edge stitching here on the Cerberus, overall I'm very impressed with the edge stitching. It sits slightly just below the surface of the pad. It has a very nice defined rounded edge to it. It's very easy to move your arm across the X and Y axis on the edge of the pad. There is no additional drag from the edge stitching, which is a great thing to see. As I mentioned earlier, the edge stitching is perfectly QC'd, and XRayPad added the extra stitching to the edge of the pad to prevent fraying, which is a great attention to detail. Overall, the implementation is very good. Now, the base of the Origins Pro lineup is one area I really wanted to highlight here, as XRayPad has dethroned Infinity Mice for the best implementation on the market. Now, all the Origins Pro pads are using XRayPad's new polyurethane honeycomb base, which as it turns out is actually very similar to their Cicada Wing 2.0 grips in terms of their feel and natural stickiness. I reached out to XRayPad to ask about this, and it turns out I was actually correct. The base material here is derived from the same material they make the Cicada Wing 2.0 grips out of them, hence why the base performs so well and is so similar to the Cicada Wings. The natural stickiness of the base anchors to desk surfaces very well and gets even stronger with some surface pressure. Now, because the pad is very soft, it doesn't pass the one finger test, but the pad does not move unless you peel it off of your desk, so as a whole it will remain anchored on your desk without any issues. During testing, I had no issues with the pad moving or shifting during use. Even with heavier grips, the pad remained completely anchored without any shifting. Also, another thing worth noting is that the pad's base doesn't need water to anchor itself. Funnily enough, water actually makes the base anchoring worse. Essentially, XRayPad has managed to do what Infinity Mice did, making a base that has the stickiness of porn but without the need for moisture, which is really cool to see. And as I mentioned earlier, the Origins Pro base anchors itself so well, it is actually dethroned Infinity Mice's custom IPU base as the best implementation on the market. XRayPad's new honeycomb base is the new king, at least for now. In my opinion, the only downside to the base is that due to its natural stickiness, it does pick up pet hair and dust very easily, but this is pretty easy to clean off. You can either swipe it off with your fingers or clean the base of the pad with a little bit of water. In terms of arm sleeve compatibility and bare arm usage, for about 90% of my testing, I used the pad with a bare arm as the surface is so smooth, it doesn't have very much friction with skin, so it's very easy to use with a bare arm. If you want to, you can use an arm sleeve. It works pretty much the exact same as using it with a bare arm because the surface is so low friction. It just doesn't really add any additional friction, which is great to see. So using the Cerberus with either an arm sleeve or a bare arm is completely viable with no issues on either side, which is wonderful to see. And lastly, in terms of the effects of pet hair and dust, from my experience over testing, I didn't run into any issues with pet hair aside from it sticking to the base of the pad. But in terms of the pad surfacing, no issues and no negative impact from pet hair or dust. This is mainly due to the softness of the surface. Keep in mind, if you end up using the Cerberus with a bare arm, you will eventually fill up the pad with dead skin and oils. So if you notice any performance problems with the pad or any inconsistencies in certain areas of the pad, just be sure to clean the pad as best you can in case there's buildup of dead skin and dust. Alright, well, in closing, overall I'm very impressed with the Cerberus Extra Soft. XRayPad has made leaps and bounds since the old Aqua Control Plus, and I'm very impressed overall, particularly with their new polyurethane honeycomb base here. Of course, the rest of the pad is also incredibly well constructed, and the Cerberus's performance is exceptional, a little unique due to this work-in period due to the heat-treated surface, but overall the XRayPad Cerberus Extra Soft has really impressed me. This pad is easily in the top 5 of 2024 for me. It is right up there with the Infinity Mice Ruin as one of the best pads of the year. The only issue I have with the Origins Pro lineup is that depending on what version you get, there is going to be a lot of variance in the performance. Hey everybody, future mel0n here, I guess you could say. I was finishing up the editing for this video and I noticed that XRayPad actually changed their website a little bit. I had given them some feedback when I was talking to them about the surfacing and the heat treatment on this pad, that they should probably be advertising that the Cerberus versions of the pad have like a work-in period, and there's going to be some inconsistencies in the X and Y axis for the first like couple days of the pad, and they actually were very quick to actually already update the website. So the website now does have a little disclaimer saying that Cerberus editions are going to have a work-in period where there will be a variance between the X and Y axis. They also took down part of the product page that had some graphs comparing the performance. I'm assuming they're going to be updating those to include the information about the work-in period and how that's going to work. So big props to XRayPad. They were really quick to take the feedback from me and update those product pages. So if you go look at the product pages by the time this video goes live, they will most likely be updated and have a proper description of how the Cerberus editions are going to change compared to the regular Origins Pro edition. Again, another common XRayPad W. I just wanted to mention they have made some updates to the product page to better tell the differences between the Origins Pro and the Cerberus editions. Okay, that's enough of future mel0n. You can go back to to the past mel0n now. Just keep in mind, if you are going to pick up one of the Origins Pro pads, the black and orange versions will maintain the differencing in the X and Y axis performance over use, making them better suited for games like Counter-Strike, Valorant, and Rainbow Six, while the Cerberus editions will initially feel uneven due to the heat treatment, but once the heat treatment is dissipated over use, the pads will feel significantly more balanced, making the Cerberus editions ideal for both X-axis and Y-axis dependent games. Just keep in mind though, on the black and orange editions, you can always flip the pad's orientation to better suit the X and Y axis to your preference. Also keep in mind the base will also slightly affect the performances you feel on the Origins Pro pads. The Extra Soft will be more controlled and the soft base will be a little faster. The Origins Pro series pads are available in 3 different sizes: 360 by 300, 450 by 400, and 500 by 500. If you're going to pick up the black or orange versions, I get the 500 by 500 version so you can flip the orientation of the pad without altering the dimensions. If you'd like to learn more about the Origins Pro or pick one up for yourself, I will have all the product links down in the video description for you all. But that is going to be everything for my review of the XRayPad's Origins Pro Extra Soft Cerberus edition. Thank you very much again to XRayPad for sending this pad over for a review. I can't wait to see what else XRayPad is cooking up. I know they recently announced their new Heavy B surfacing that looks to be like a hexagonal kind of stitch, similar to the stitching we saw on the Infinity Mice pads, but a little larger. So I'm very, very excited to see how that surface feels, because that is a very even surfacing, good for hybrid pads, but I'll take a look at those in another video at another time. If you enjoyed the review and want to see more reviews like this, be sure to drop a like here and get subscribed to the channel. If you'd like to support my reviews here and the Teardown Project, you can become a member here on YouTube. It is only $2 Canadian per month, and it is the best way to directly support the channel. You can also support the channel by using code mel0n with the 0 over at Lethal Gaming Gear, Mech Keys, Potent Gaming, TJ Exclusives, and a couple other retailers to save yourself some money on your orders and directly support the channel. Thanks again for watching my review of the XRayPad Origins Pro Cerberus Extra Soft, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the mel0n Review. Peace.